Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen. A great deal has been said this morning, but I'm still inspired, if I may say so, by your speech this morning, Mr. President. And with that, I take a license for a moment to take you back to a year in Kenya's history when you were 15 and I just a little bit older. It was the year that in Olkaria and Hell's Gate National Park, the first geothermal unit was installed. I mention this because the journey of Kenya in so many ways represents, when it comes to the energy sector, to leadership, to transition, to many of the things that you spoke about this morning, reflects what happens when people do not take the answer, it's not possible, it's not doable, it's too expensive, too seriously. Hell's Gate National Park is only about an hour outside Nairobi. Kenyans know it well. Visitors, please visit it, because it is today one of the most remarkable places, the backbone of Kenya's electricity generating economy. That first Mitsubishi turbine installed in 1981 was installed against a great deal of skepticism. I learned about this history during the years that I spent here. It took many pioneers to envisage it. Today, Mr. President, I believe that Olkaria, with its various generating turbines, generates almost 1,000 megawatts of electricity. And ladies and gentlemen, you are in a country that may very well become the first country in modern history to actually generate its entire electricity supply with clean energy sources. Kenya today is a country that has passed the 92% mark, and it is no longer alone. In fact, Mr. President, there is another country in South America I visited and I did not know. Uruguay today, well over 90% of its electricity supply with renewables. This is not to say that every country can follow the same path, but what we do in UNDP, and why I'm so proud to be here together with my Secretary General and so many of the partners that are today invested in precisely the kind of vision that you have laid out for Africa, is that we can be partners. We have listened, we have learned together, and today, as UNDP, 36 countries on the African continent have invited UNDP to help them undertake integrated national financing frameworks to address this continuously frustrating reality that this continent is asked to borrow for things that it was neither responsible for nor it can afford to borrow in this world of today. That is why looking at finance with the kind of lens that you have both spoken to this morning is so important. Secondly, also pioneering projects such as solar mini-grids, another major enterprise of UNDP. For the first time in history, we are supporting 21 African countries to try and connect over the next few years 260 million people to electricity supplies. A $65 billion investment opportunity, but it needs hard work, both to prepare the ground, to find the investors, and to then roll it out. And finally, Mr. President, let me just commit to you, in the presence of so many leaders from across the continent, the United Nations Development Programme, as part of the United Nations family, as you heard from the Secretary General this morning, is deeply committed to Africa's future transitions, coming out of the reality of today, but investing every day across the continent. I'm proud to today lead an organization within our UN development system that is literally present in every African country on this continent. We are invested in terms of your nationally determined contributions. We are invested in your energy transition just as deeply as we're invested in poverty eradication and ultimately a future for Africa that you spoke so eloquently this morning. Thank you so much for the privilege of addressing you today, and thank you.
Thank you very much, Steiner. I guess everybody, when they get a chance, they speak about their village. The Olkaria, where Steiner has very passionately talked about, is in his county of Nakuru. Thank you very much. Now, let me give another 2 minutes. Finally, this is the final one, to Bill Gates on video for 2 minutes, and then we will move the program to the next stage.
Hello. I want to thank President Ruto for convening this event and prioritizing this important work. I started work on climate change over 2 decades ago after I left my full-time work at Microsoft, and I was focusing on fighting poverty and fighting diseases. When I visited Africa, I saw two things. First was how climate is already
orientation run designed to familiarize us with our journey into the future, driven by African solutions, powered by African resources, and anchored on African opportunities. The collaboration I have in mind must be bold in ambition, broad in scope for their vision, deep in terms of diversity of their stakeholders, and long in terms of their geographical reach. An impressive example that I have had opportunity to interact with is the Global Center for Adaptation, an organization based in Rotterdam in the Netherlands, whose constitution is an appealing emblem of our aspiration, from the aspirational design of its global headquarters and futuristic regional headquarters in Nairobi, comprising green walls and roofs as well as rain gardens, to the collaborative culture of its staff. Unsurprisingly, the center is intended to inspire the world to thrive with nature instead of pursuing the dangerous course of seeking to thrive at the expense of nature. The center spearheads the Africa Adaptation Acceleration Program, a focal point collaboration with the University of Nairobi, Africa Development Bank, and the Africa Union Commission as part of the continent's response to the climate crisis. I am delighted to announce that as an outcome of this summit today, Kenya will host the GCA Africa headquarters here in Nairobi. Ladies and gentlemen, it has taken tremendous courage, effort, and determination to leave behind us the old continent that was historically profiled with intense negativity. The Africa whose people neither are there to be seen or heard has summoned the confidence and readiness to confront hard facts, engage truthfully, and forge a common position on critical issues that project a new, bold, radically transformative voice into the global discourse. And let me say here that we have discussed potential. And it is true, we need to have a conversation about Africa's potential. Why? Because we have been profiled negatively. The continent of disease, war, poverty. But we are stepping forward to say, look here.
Gentlemen, as we now wait, we're going to take a very short interlude of music. And at this point, can we all just stand up and stretch a little bit? Just stand up wherever you are and see whether we can stretch. I'm sure some of us have been sitting for long, long periods of time. So the next part we're coming to is the new global climate finance architecture. This is a centerpiece and a part that we've been waiting for all this time. And therefore, thank you so much for your patience. You can sit down now. You can take your seats. I just wanted you to stand up and stretch for a little bit. And this is definitely going to be one of the highlights of this whole conference. So we request that we just remain patient, and this is where we are heading from here. So I'll request that we have a short interlude of music just to get us ready for the next session. As mentioned, it's a new global climate finance architecture that is coming up right here. So for now, let's have the interlude of music as we get ourselves ready. Once you've stretched enough, you may take your seats.
I am part of the solution. You are part of the solution. Africa, rise, rise, Pambazuka. Let us all rise, rise, Pambazuka. Africa, rise, rise, Pambazuka. Let us all rise, rise, Pambazuka. We are part of the solution. I am part of the solution. We are part of the solution. You are part of the solution. change the climate story and show ourselves in all our splendor and glory. Yeah. Let's come together now. To bring down all barriers for a greater tomorrow. So Africa, arise. Let us all arise. Time to be counted. Arise. Let us all arise. Secure the future of humanity. Solutions made in Africa. Speak with one voice. Sing the word. Africa, rise, Papa Zuka. Let us all rise, Papa Zuka. Africa, rise, Papa Zuka. Let us all rise, Papa Zuka.
Africa is the continent with 60% of the world's renewable energy assets. Whether you talk about wind, whether you talk about solar, geothermal, hydropower. Number two, we're saying Africa is the continent that has 40% of the world's critical minerals for energy transition, whether you talk about nickel, cobalt, lithium, manganese.
And I know as I stand here before you, we are actually having all the audience from South Africa all the way to Djibouti, from all the way Mozambique to Morocco, and across Uganda all the way to Nigeria. So this is Africa, and Africa is talking, and they have been heard. We want to thank you, Moses Chaliko. As you continue around, we want to say the action is now. We have waited for long. That is what Africa is saying. And thank you so much, and may God bless you.
Asante. Let's give a clap to Dr. Chumo and also for Wanjira Mathai for doing a fantastic job. Let's give them a good clap. Asante sana Wanjira, you've taken the sessions very well. At this point, Your Excellency, we are coming near to the end, and I would request if I can just have a photo with the panelists or with Wanjira. So Wanjira, if you can come back, and then I'll request the panelists you're with to come down here, and then you can take one photo. And then secondly, the second one we'll take with the panelists that were taken by Dr. Susan Chomba. So, Adlostia, kindly welcome to the front. Hans, welcome to the front. And also Miss Kristin, welcome to the front. We take one photo, and then it'll be followed by the other panelists, then we close. Your Excellencies, welcome.
Joma peyo, joma chungile, kiti yo mate, kendo kikero pinywa, anapoyo
Your Excellencies, Honorable Ministers, distinguished participants, delegates, ladies and gentlemen, good morning and welcome to Kenya. This African moment is a global moment where climate action is actually green growth. I am delighted to be here with you for a number of reasons. First, I am excited to participate in this summit as a scientist who has done some research on ecological impacts of human activity on fragile and precious ecosystems, including rivers and wetlands. I am also privileged to be leading the Kenyan delegation to the Africa Climate Summit. And besides, I have the honor for the time being of serving the young green continent of the future as the chair of CAHOST, the Committee of African Heads of State on Climate Change. And for hosting this event with my good brothers from the AU. And I dare say this conversation is happening in the right city, where the UN has the global environmental capital, where we have UNEP. I am therefore highly encouraged by your strong response for our invitation to attend and participate in this inaugural transformative Continental Assembly convened to focus on climate action from the standpoint of generating African solutions to global challenges. The participation in the numerous events that make up this summit has so far demonstrated impressive commitment, extraordinary enthusiasm, exemplary motivation, and unparalleled determination to confront the problems, clarify issues, engage inclusively, and define a unique strategy platform for the implementation of bold interventions to catalyze progress in the global climate action agenda. I welcome you to Nairobi, our burgeoning and sleepless green city in the sun that is bounded by a national wildlife park and a close canopy of indigenous forest. In between, our capital pulsates with the restless energy of community, enterprise, industry, innovation, learning, fun, and adventure. Please feel at home and find time to enjoy the sights and sounds of our city and country. And when I say welcome home, it's both figuratively but also in reality. I did say yesterday, I did inform the participants yesterday that Kenya, where you are sitting, a few kilometers from where you are sitting, has been discovered the earliest remains of man on earth. And it means that before you guys went all over the place in Africa, Europe, and America, and the rest of the world, we all began from here. And therefore, it is correct for me to tell you, welcome home. And while you are away, These are the greetings, just so that you find your way around.
Ndiyo nguzo ya nchi yetu, tukiungana sote pamoja tutaijenga Kenya yetu.
Kwa amani na upendo. Siku ya pili ya kongamano hili almaarufu kabisa kama the African Climate Summit, kongamano ambalo linahusu mabadiliko ya tabia nchi barani Afrika. Tangu asubuhi, mtazamaji, tumeweza kushuhudia mambo mengi ambayo yameweza kufanyika hii leo. Tumeweza kuwa na makubaliano ambayo yaliweza kuafikiwa mida ya mchana, ambapo tuliweza kuona baadhi ya viongozi wakikubaliana kuwa ifikiapo mwaka 2030 nchi zote zinafaa kuwa angalau zimeanza kutumia kawi safi ili kupunguza athari za mabadiliko ya tabia nchi. Mtazamaji, vile vile tumeweza kuona baadhi ya marais ambao waliweza kuhudhuria ama wameweza kuhudhuria kongamano hili wakiweza kuongea tu, wakichangia katika mijadala ambayo imekuwa kwa siku ya leo, na vile vile wakiweza kuhutubia wajumbe ambao wameweza kufika katika kongamano hili la kihistoria ambalo ni la kwanza kabisa barani Afrika. Baadhi ya viongozi ama marais ambao waliweza kuhudhuria kongamano hili wameweza kugusia mambo kadha wa kadha, hasa mambo ambayo yanaangazia kuleta suluhu katika athari ambazo zinakumba bara hili la Afrika. Kikubwa, mtazamaji, ni kuwa Afrika ni mwamko mpya kwa bara hili la Afrika. Tumeweza kuona baadhi ya marais wakiweza kuongelelea umuhimu wa kukuza maendeleo katika bara hili kwa kuzingatia rasilimali za bara hili la Afrika. wengi wameweza kusema kuwa bara hili lina rasilimali nyingi sana, kutoka kwa madini ambayo yapo katika bara hili, misitu, na vile vile watu ambao wanaweza kufanya kazi katika rasilimali hizi ama kutumia rasilimali hizi. Mtazamaji, kwa sasa na kuregesha tena kwenye kongamano hili tuweze kufuatilia mijadala ambayo inaendelea kufikia sasa.
Here a little bit and catch up with some people, but I'd like you please to take your seats as we commence this very important part of the next program. It's the core, really, of this entire summit. Thank you. Please sit down. Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, funding climate action in Africa is really going to require a reform of the global financial architecture. Africa has submitted its reform proposals, highlighting the link between global financial inequities and insufficient finance for development and climate needs. We want to talk a little bit about what exactly these proposals are. What do we want? Why have they not received the kind of attention that we believe they need to receive? And how can Africa speak with one voice in championing this critical agenda? So, ladies and gentlemen, please give a very warm welcome to the President and Chairman of the Board of Directors for the African Export-Import Bank, Professor Benedict Orama.
Our distinguished convener, dear brother, His Excellency William Ruto, President of the Republic of Kenya, His Excellency Musa Faki Mahamat, the Chairperson of the African Union, Excellency, Heads of State, Excellencies, distinguished ladies and gentlemen. Let me start by thanking the government and people of Kenya under the leadership of His Excellency President William Ruto for the wisdom of hosting this very important event and granting me the honor of moderating this high-level panel. The key message of the 2015 Paris Climate Accord was that no country should have to choose between fighting poverty and fighting for the planet. The Paris Summit identified a critical role finance will play in ensuring this. Extensive commitments on climate financing were made there. 8 years since Paris, Africa and many developing countries have no resources to fight neither poverty nor the climate challenges that we face every day. The problem, though, hasn't been a deficit of ideas and suggestions, but rather the lack of action on the part of almost all stakeholders. Whether it is the pledge of G7 leaders to commit $100 billion climate finance, or the Bristol Initiative calling for international lenders and multilateral development banks to become more adaptive and innovative in structuring loans and debt servicing for countries affected by climate disasters, or calls by developing economies for the reform of the G20 common framework to give voice to the global south. The challenge remains the difficulty of moving from words to action. It is estimated that Africa will require about $200 billion per annum to achieve SDGs by 2030. Another $160 billion will be required for African countries to pursue loss and damage mitigation and adaptation, implying a combined annual cost of pursuing a climate-efficient development of over $350 billion. When you add the money needed for infrastructure of over $100 billion, you can begin to imagine the level of financing that is required. And the question has always been, who will bear the cut? Who will fund the gargantuan cost? We find ourselves in quite a unique situation today. A situation where the economies that are responsible for the most emissions, in a cumulative and static sense, are also the wealthiest. That scenario makes it easier to apply the principle of burden sharing that recognizes the degree of contributions to emissions and the level of access to resources in the distribution of responsibilities. Therefore, we must call on developed economies and G20 economies in general to honor their commitments to developing nations towards climate finance. Nonetheless, in the absence of firm global action, Africa has not been sitting on its palms, especially because it is the continent that suffers the most from the loss and damage inflicted by climate. It is the continent that needs to adapt to the changes we are beginning to see. So things are being done, even at a very small scale. For instance, Afrexim Bank and Africa Risk Capacity have jointly created an insurance product that protects African economies from food insecurity that arises from climate disaster risks. Afrexim Bank finances the premium and provides food import finance and co-guarantee to Africa Risk Capacity, while Africa Risk Capacity fronts the provision of the insurance capacity. Funding at just $1 billion for this product, you will agree with me that this is grossly underfunded. There is therefore a scope for the World Bank, the multilateral development banks in general, capital-rich economies to step in by providing capital to this fund as a way of meeting their loss and damage obligations. A global carbon tax, which His Excellency President Ruto emphasized on today, can also be a major source of funding for the climate insurance program. Money from that can be used to subsidize the insurance that countries may pay to buy this climate disaster insurance. Afrexim Bank has also launched a $2 billion climate adaptation facility, a product we co-conceived with the government of Kenya under President Ruto. And this product provides facilities that makes it possible for countries to engage in adaptation projects in a way that does not lead to additional sovereign debt, leveraging public-private partnerships. The first transactions will be done here in Kenya, and we expect to replicate those transactions in the Sahel and other parts of the continent. While these are tangible proposals and initiatives, political leadership and collective will are paramount to breaking the course of further development and fighting climate disaster. This high-level panel of key leaders will aim to provide the political guidance needed as we prepare to make an even stronger case at the upcoming COP28 in the United Arab Emirates later this year. I'm sure that our distinguished panelists will bring greater illumination to these issues and more. In this context, it is my singular honor to now welcome our esteemed panelists. Let me begin by inviting our host, His Excellency President William Ruto, to please come up to the podium to take his seat. His Excellency Musa Faki Mahamat, Chairperson of the African Union Commission. His Excellency Nana Addo Dankwa Akufo-Addo, President of the Republic of Ghana. His Excellency Mustafa Madbouli, Prime Minister of Egypt. Her Excellency Francia Marquez, Vice President of Colombia. His Excellency Dr. Sultan Jebba, COP28 President and Honorable Minister of the UAE. His Excellency Sigrid Kaag, Deputy Prime Minister of the Netherlands. Sorry, Her Excellency. Thank you again, and on your behalf, let me welcome our panelists once more. Since this morning, we've had quite extensive discussions and presentations on ideas about what to do to make sure that we move from discussion to action, especially with regard to climate finance. So let me begin by asking host, President Ruto, what he should consider to be the key elements of global climate finance architecture that we should all be aiming at, especially when we get to UAE for COP28.
Thank you very much, Professor Orama. As I said this morning, how do we move from potential to opportunity? And how do we turn the opportunities we have into jobs, into investments, and into industrialization, manufacturing, and growth? That's really what we need to do. And front and center is the big elephant. Where is the money going to come from? How are we going to finance our transition from opportunity to growth? In my opinion, there are three areas that we need to focus. Number one, we need to focus on where do we find money or resources or financing, number one, at scale. And number two, that is affordable. And number three, that is accessible. And that is why we have insisted that while we appreciate the contribution of our multilateral development institutions, the current financial architecture to support our progress,
what they are doing is good, but it is insufficient because our current challenges are compounded. We're not dealing with a normal situation. We're not dealing with the situation for which these institutions were built. And therefore, it is important for us to realign our sources of financing with the realities of the moment. The moment we need a scale-up of development resources. And that is why we are speaking about scale. At the moment, we need to make sure that these resources are available at rates that are friendly to the investments we want to make. And therefore, in my very honest opinion, the reform of the multilateral development banks will achieve two things. And when we talk about reform of multilateral development banks, some of those banks, whether it is IMF or World Bank, we are shareholders. So legitimately, these are our institutions. And therefore, we need to deal with how do we make these institutions of ours much more fit for purpose? How do we make them fit for purpose? So, number one, we think like we did with COVID, when there was some creativity and innovation that resulted in special drawing rights. We think that there is scope in that window of special drawing rights to meet the challenges that we have of the moment of energy transition. What we would want done differently this time is that the manner in which these resources are allocated should be different, where those who need it most get it, while those who need it least don't have to get a lion's share of what they don't need. That's number one. Number two, we believe also creatively and in an innovative manner, there is scope for us to use and leverage the balance sheets of these institutions. And I must do a disclaimer. I am not a financial person. I am a scientist. But I am very confident that we have very intelligent people. We are not short of good economists and analysts and financial people who can imagine that space and tell us what is it that we can do to leverage the balance sheets of these great institutions. And that is what my sister Motley is talking about, the Bridgetown Initiative. How do we raise an extra $500 billion every year, or at least in 5 years, to be able to do what we must do with energy transition? And finally, I think the other option that we need to have a conversation about is carbon tax. This is a very controversial thing, but it is the right thing to have the conversation about. However controversial it may be, I mean, we need to have a conversation about carbon tax. If we are to raise the scale of resources needed for energy transition, we must have a conversation about carbon tax. In fact, the numbers speak to it. The IMF has actually done a lot of work around it. And they have told us it is possible to raise 870 billion shillings from carbon tax. The only problem that IMF is pointing to us is that there is insufficient political will. And there are challenges with political will. Surely, faced with an existential threat to humanity. Aren't we able to muster the political will to achieve this? And let me give one more thought around it. The EU Parliament has already considered FTT, the financial transaction tax, as a means of raising resources to deal with climate change. And in fact, they've gone all the way to their parliament. So the idea of a carbon tax is no longer remote. We must have it firmly on the table. And finally, Professor, we are making these suggestions because we are practical. We are dealing with practical situations. As I said this morning, 9 countries have already gone off the cliff. Many are on the way there to debt distress because of high interest rates and because of climate change. Unless we deal with it, and let us not imagine that we are sorted, especially because when we were in Paris, admittedly, there were found ways of dealing with countries that have been already in default. But the question we ask ourselves, do we have to wait until countries have gone to default to sort them out? Isn't it possible for us to sort them out ahead of the cliff? And that is the conversation we are having. And let me conclude by saying that this time round, we're going to be firmly on the table. It doesn't matter how uncomfortable this conversation is. It doesn't matter who we annoy. We are going to be here until we are heard and until the right thing happens.
No, thank you very much. Let me go to Chairperson Musafaki. Chairperson, you just heard what President Ruto said. As we form the views as a continental view, from the African Union's perspective, what should we be expecting? What is the African Union's views and strategy to make sure that all these ideas that we are forming here find their way into implementable actions when the COP28 convenes? Thank you.
Merci, Professeur Orama. J'ai écouté effectivement attentivement le président Ruto.
President Ruto.
Et je l'en remercie.
And I thank him.
Je le remercie pour son plaidoyer fort.
I thank him for his strong advocacy, his leadership,
Mais aussi et surtout,
but also and particularly for the concrete proposals that he has put on the table.
la situation de l'Afrique est connue.
The situation of Africa is well known. The challenges faced by the continent are known.
Les attentes qu'il nourrit
And the expectations that are nurtured are known. Its important potential also is known. The promises made to Africa are also known.
il y a une importante littérature sur la question.
There is a lot of literature on this matter.
Maintenant, qu'est-ce qu'il faut faire?
Now, what should we do? This is the question.
Il faut d'abord accepter la spécificité.
First, we have to accept the specific nature of the continent. 600 million Africans don't even have electricity. It is a continent which is under-industrialized, and then is being asked here and now to bring about the ecological transition. President Macky Sall earlier was saying that we need to follow the rhythm and peculiarity of this continent. All this can be possible. Transition, yes, it is important, but we need to establish the necessary conditions for it to become possible. Africa is not coming empty-handed. It is a reservoir. So I think we need to think of that, how this important potential may be harnessed for the benefit of its peoples. This is a substantive issue. The promises that have been made, including the reform of international financial institutions, and what we have seen in the past, the structural adjustment programs, which for decades had been applied by the African states. And I recall, I'm talking of Chad, my country, we were asked even that certain agricultural productivity, particularly rice, they should stop production and import rice. It did not work. We have to admit that. It did not work. Then we went to programs of the World Bank, poverty reduction. What is the result? Let's take stock. Some countries are now even poorer. And I do not exclude, and I am not condoning poor governance, and I am not excluding the responsibilities of the states, but the special drawing rights. There was some hope. Out of 650 million, we got only, and I'm really asking whether this was disbursed, 33 million or 33 billion. After a terrible pandemic like COVID, can we really have economic recovery? It is not possible. The Green Fund, we have been told about it. All this within a context of debt servicing, and then the situation of countries that are appreciated, which are some countries that are considered arid. I'm not a pessimist, and by the profession, my training, my cannot be pessimist. That is why we expect, and from this important conference, and it is very timely, so that around the table with our partners, with the financial institutions, with international organizations and the member states, since the challenge of climate change does not forgive anybody, does not distinguish between African, American or Indian. I think we are all in the same boat. Let us make sure that this boat doesn't sink. That is the real problem. I'm not a technical expert to go into the various labyrinths of how to market carbon, etc. and all. I think we cannot be just content with promises. Those that have been promises made have never been fulfilled, have never been honored. Let us ask ourselves the real question, and honestly, whether politically we have decided this time to be serious and to be consistent. And thank you.
Thank you, Chairman. I think with the kind of enthusiasm we've seen here, the passion and the commitments shown by our leaders, I believe that Africans have had enough. I think everybody now wants to see action because we've used many years to think and talk about what can be done. Now it is what will be done. With that, let me invite our brother Mo Ibrahim to join the panel. Mo. Yes. No, thank you for joining us. So, and let me ask Prime Minister Madbuli, given the challenges many countries face today, the financing challenges, interest rates, debt overhang, and of course the large financial requirements for meeting the climate finance requirements at country level and continental level and so on. What would be your suggestion on the best approach? President Afwerki mentioned we should look inwards, we shouldn't look outside. Many said we should look outside. So there are different views. The important thing is we need the money. So from your perspective, what would be the suggestion on how to find the money? Thank you.
Thank you very much. And let me start by stating that climate finance is undeniably the central pillar for empowering the delivery of climate goals and nationally determined contribution, or NDCs, in particular for our African continent. In this regard, allow me to summarize Egypt's vision in this respect as follows. First, climate finance constitutes a cornerstone and foundation for the full implementation of national commitments and contribution as outlined by developing countries, and to the transition to a green economy and addressing climate change issues. International agreements, including the UN FCCC and Paris Agreement, clearly established a direct link between the level of financing provided to developing countries to support their efforts and the level of ambition and national actions. And needless to mention that this does not imply any backsliding from exerting maximum efforts nationally to deliver on ambitious commitment and NDCs, but rather underscores that financing should serve as a key driver and enabler to complement national resources with a clear goal of swift and effective implementation. Secondly, it is essential to deal with the staggering funding gap with a realistic approach and build upon current estimates to enable the implementation of the commitment declared by developing countries, which amount to around $5.6 trillion by 2030. The required investment in renewable energy alone is approximately $1 trillion annually. Likewise, the amount of international funding needed to achieve carbon neutrality amounts to about $4 trillion annually. These are the estimates required to implement the scientific recommendation to maintain the 1.5-degree target. Thirdly, this volume of financing underscores the need for a significant overhaul of international financial institutions and multilateral developing banks in alignment with the objective laid out in Sharm el-Sheikh implementation plan. This restructuring should be driven by three core goals: additionality, through increasing climate financing levels without impacting the funding already designated for sustainable development and poverty eradication; accessibility, through facilitating access to climate finance by developing countries without stringent conditions and other obstacles; and right finance instruments, through offering concessional financing instruments and removing, as His Excellency President Ruto mentioned, and removing the unfair and unbalanced rate posed on developing and African countries, including the surcharge imposed by some multilateral development banks. Such a reform should also consider the constraints posed by debt, limited resources for adaptation efforts, the escalating cost of financing due to the interest rate surges, and the collateral requirements to entice global investment. In essence, this approach aims to prevent the deepening of the debt crisis in the developing world and the African continent. Fourthly, there is a need to transform the challenges of debt into an opportunity for innovative financing mechanism. This includes effective mechanism for debt for climate swap, redirecting financing towards developmental and environmental projects, as well as a review of international financial institutions' policies regarding restrictions and fees on loans to developing countries. In this context, we welcome the Bridgetown initiative as a step forward in facilitating financing for developing countries facing the impact of climate change. I would like further highlight Egypt initiatives in partnership with the Economic Commission of Africa on Sustainable Debt Coalition endorsed by African Ministers of Finance, which aim at decreasing the cost of green financing. Those initiatives contribute to the reform of the international financial architecture. We already have the support of more than 22 African countries for the Sustainable Debt Coalition and call for all African countries to join these initiatives. Lastly, it is crucial to explore innovative financing tools, including carbon market and certain fees or taxes on specific activities and economic sectors. But in doing so, and in considering such innovative sources, we need to ensure that they are in line with the international agreements and fully considering its socio-economic implications, particularly on our developing countries. At the same time, ensuring that we are refraining from any unilateral actions that might hinder the competitiveness of our African exports or our ability to attract foreign direct investments. I would like at the end to state that Egypt firmly believes that raising the level of ambition in the new NDCs without a corresponding increase in appropriate financing and a review of current financing mechanism will not contribute to achieving the desired goal, whether in energy transition, emissions reduction, or adaptation. It is imperative that we witness a clear shift in the policies of multilateral financial institutions and development partners in this regard. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Excellency, for that. And I think you just sent a message inviting all African countries who have not yet joined the coalition to do so. There are 22 already. I think the invitation is for the rest, 33 countries to consider joining so that you can have one voice in pushing this. So thank you. Let me go to the Deputy Prime Minister, Kicc. You've heard from African leaders about their expectations, what they want from the discussions that have been ongoing on financing climate. You looking from outside to inside, what is your take on that, on what they've said? What would you suggest, and what do you think the developing economies or developed economies can do to support the initiatives that have been proposed? Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, and thank you very much for President Ruto for this fantastic initiative. Actually, I don't think there are any sides. There are just different shades of the same coin and different potential affordability and accessibility. But there's one side, and that's the climate action and the urgency. Because we are one humanity, and we will all perish together, some sooner than later, but this is the stark reality. So I think from that vantage point, we've heard a lot also in recent years. We know what success looks like. The big question remains political leadership, political will. And this is where differentiation lies in, because some countries will have to do more and others will have to do less. And some might lie in between. Let me just detail this. We know we need to stand for climate justice. And this needs to be detailed in a more meaningful way so that it makes sense to all, that also general audiences in Western Europe or OECD countries actually figure this out from a relative vantage of an advanced economy. We need to consider equity and urgency. Now, I'm very seized with the notion of opportunity because I think it's very big, it's equally important, and it's the only way we can drive this agenda away from being only an existentialist crisis and to keep people along with this flow. Now, the how, that's the what. The how is straightforward, technical support, but it differs per country. It can be high-level technical support, but it needs to be quick, it needs to be available, and it needs to be affordable. And very often it's still costed by the countries themselves. Here we need to fix that. Equally so, I think we've lost a lot of time in focusing too much in a lot of agendas on mitigation as opposed to adaptation. We now know both need to happen, but we need to make up for lost time. When it comes to finance, of course, very often the elephant in the room. I've been a Minister for Trade and Aid. I've worked a long time for the UN. The best ideas fall foul of lack of political will, or affordability and finance. The substance most can agree to. Now, on the MDBs, we really think as shareholders and as partners in this endeavor, the reforms, the capital adequacy framework reforms need to happen now. There's an institutional burden of proof and leadership at the MDBs, as well as the IFIs, as well as the shareholders. I think President Ruto said that as well. We're all in this. We own part of it. We need to make this happen. We also see potential in differentiated pricing, in hybrid capital. It's only a pilot, but let's make the pilots work and scale them up. Too much time is lost in talking about pilots that remain standalone pilots. Secondly, private sector. I've heard a lot in recent years on how the private sector is willing, and I'm fully convinced, yet they need very often the right governance framework, they need to know which partnership they are part of, and they need scalable and callable projects where governments, such as mine, can guarantee the risks. The onus should not be on the developing or highly indebted country to also guarantee the risk. This is where I think we sometimes fail to connect the dots. Now, last but not least, governments. We need to really make serious business out of onward lending of the SDRs. We also need to increase the SDRs. We need to provide the additional finance. Now, as a Minister of Finance, of course, my other hat, I'll tell you, this is not a very popular theme. Everybody nods, yes, very important. No, we agree with Mrs. Kag. But then it's either cost-cutting or it's increase of taxation or other means of financial availability. And this is where domestic audiences suddenly become reticent. This is where political will comes in, to make this a shared agenda for all of us. It's not easy, it can be done. We actually won elections on this ticket in the Netherlands last time round. I don't think we'll do as well this time, but still, it can be done. Innovation, an obvious one. Blended finance mentioned. Green bonds. We were the first AAA rated country that issued green bonds. We can assist other countries, but we also need to find ways for many of the developing countries to issue their own green bonds to also provide for the domestic resource mobilization that needs to happen as part of accountability. The sensitive topic of loss and damage, I look forward to the discussion at the COP28 because I think there's a fair claim that has been put forward. Now the negotiations will see how far we'll go. I think the political symbolism of the discussion is equally important if we talk about equity and a shared agenda. Now, last but not least, carbon tax and carbon pricing. Very, very important. Unless you price it, unless you tax it, it often has little meaning. The only way to change behavior, productivity, the way we produce and consume, particularly at the large emitting countries, is if we price it more and we make that part of a global public good. But that's part of a discussion. Last but not least, together with my friend and colleague, Minister of Finance of Indonesia, I co-chair the Global Coalition of Ministers of Finance for Climate Action. So a 1-second pitch, all Ministers of Finance, if not in the room, join this coalition. Make your budgets work for climate action. This is where the duty and opportunity of care lies. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Prime Minister, for the illuminating comments. I see there is no actually night and day between what the African leaders are saying and what you've said. Let me now go to Francia, the Vice President. From Colombia, from Meru, and then exported to Colombia. We share the same heritage, and incidentally, the same problems. We understand ourselves. We understand the burden we are carrying. We understand the challenges the climate has posed on us. So, looking from where you are inside and listening to our leaders, and also the Deputy Prime Minister from Netherlands, what would be your suggestion, especially from your experience in Latin America and the Caribbean? Thank you.
Muchas gracias.
In the first place, I must say that Latin America and the Caribbean are experiencing the pressures of powerful economies that want to continue exploiting our natural resources. And this pressure of exploiting our natural resources contribute to increasing the climate crisis. There are very few the governments who are taking up the decarbonized economy, an economy that makes a transition and a transformation in this matter. Obviously, in low-income countries, the vulnerable countries, or the middle-income countries like the Latin American countries, this is a great challenge because we have based our economy on extraction. We have based our economy on carbon, to coal. In my country, we are the first alternative government, and we are creating a change in the laws and also a change of paradigms, in social paradigms, because we have to create awareness that contributing to the exploitation that accumulates capital but does not generate well-being and that destroys the ecosystem is not a path that we accept. In this sense, we want to make a transition, and as I had said before, we have serious problems, serious financial problems, which in some way do not allow us to resolve the challenges of the effects of the climatic crisis. But in the case of Colombia, we have a conflict, a social conflict, an armed conflict, a war which we are experiencing, which contributes to exacerbate this situation of vulnerability in our country. And in this sense, I think that we have an increase of the debts with very high interest rates that do not allow that within our country we can have the necessary resources to invest in these proposals for energy transition and actions for mitigation and adaptation to the climate change. This will not change if we continue with the current financial system, as I have said, which has a colonialist point of view. The financial system, the international financial system that we have today, is one that does not allow justice, social justice, and neither does it allow for climatic justice. In our countries, the basic needs are not satisfied. So, and there are lots of needs. We are one of the countries where They are the most inequalities in the planet. Sometimes we have to not invest socially in drinking water, in health, in electricity and connectivity in order to use these resources from the treasury to pay the external debts, which, as I was telling you, has very high interest rates with respect to countries which do not have the same conditions that we have. In this sense, we have spoken about exchange of debt for climate action with new rules, not the same traditional rules, because this problem, which is not a traditional way of carrying out things, we have to innovate with new actions, new rules. The financial system today does not help us to face the challenges of climate change. It's not a system that was created for us, and it's not a just system for our countries. And in this sense, we have come to present a multilateral agreement because this is already a global crisis that requires a global response, and that means that, as we had done during the pandemic, we can do, or maybe in this multilateral agreement, we can do what was done during the pandemic, to issue special rights that can allow the vulnerable countries and the middle-income countries to generate conditions of flexibility in regard to their debts, and to free resources to invest in our lands, in our communities, in our nations. Otherwise, it wouldn't be possible to care for this situation. This is a proposal which President Gustavo Petro has presented to the world, and we agree with President Ruto about the need to reform the financial system. The qualifiers of debt increase the crisis, because in a catastrophic situation of our country, the risk rating makes it more difficult to access to credit, which allows us to finance these programs. Therefore, we are in a situation of inequality, and which has some effects that are higher than those of other countries that are in better economic conditions. And this implies that we have to think that Latin America and the Caribbean and Africa should unite with one voice and to present in a very specific way what we have been doing to reform the financial system, so that our countries we can access to better conditions of social and climatic justice.
Thank you very much, Vice President Francia, for those comments and insights. Let me now go to Brother Mo. Mo, I will call you a private sector person, a businessman, and a philanthropist. So you straddle all. So you have been campaigning for good governance, campaigning for climate justice, and so on. As we gather here to have a common view, a common position for Africa as we prepare to go to COP28, and having listened to everybody here, from your perspective as a philanthropist, as a businessman, what would you like to add, or what do you think we should not take with us to the world? Thank you.
much. Can you hear me? Okay. I really have 4 points to make. And the first one really is there is a silver bullet to solve this problem. And we are just like dodging all that to talk about, oh, how we can get more money for climate finance. Just tax carbon. Use the market. You guys in the rich countries taught us about, you invented capitalism, invented market. Why aren't you applying market forces to carbon? Why? And that is the question, because the problem now is that people make promises. Oh, you know, those poor guys in Africa and somewhere else, they have a problem there. Okay, well, we are kind people, you know. We're going to offer them some money. How about $100 billion for climate fight? But then, actually, things are tight. Sorry, we cannot make it this year. Well, in those guys' mind, it's charity. It's charity, and that's a mistake. It should not be charity. This should be an international clear agreement. You break it, you own it. That is the honest answer. Without changing the market dynamic, will not change. Now, every American, man, woman, child, emits 17 tons every year. Every European, 6.5 to 7 tons a year. China, same. Now, the question here, excuse me, who gave you the right to use all this amount of carbon? We are 8 billion people in this planet. Science tells us we cannot emit more than 24 billion tons a year. That's 3 tons per head. 3 tons per head. Who gave the Americans the right to do 17? Who gave the Europeans the right to do 7? Why? You pay for it. If you pay for it, then you change. Then you cannot change behavior unless you pay for it. The only problem is that we have very few statesmen. We have many politicians, very few statesmen. President Juncker, who is the president of the European Union a few years ago, said something very beautiful, actually. He said, you know what? All of us politicians, we know what to do. But we don't know how to get elected if we do it. And that is the problem. That is the problem. We have a lot of politicians who want to be elected, but nothing will happen then. So nothing happens. So we must fight for carbon tax. I love what the Deputy Prime Minister said about that. And the first time I hear a senior European politician say that. Look, soon there's going to be a seat available for the Prime Minister in your country. I hope you get it. Anyway, because that's honorable of you to say that. Those guys are in denial. Who puts all this carbon up there? Who put it up? Own it. You need to own what you break something, you do it. That's the first point. Without carbon tax, everything else is charity. It doesn't work. That's one thing. Second thing, we talk about investment in Africa and green investment. We have been talking about investment in Africa for ages, but nobody invests in Africa. Trickle. Simple reason, it is impossible to invest in Africa. If all this rating agency rate you guys as junk, you are sub-grade investment. Who's going to invest here? Most of the money out there, private money, is in pension funds, insurance companies. By law, they cannot invest here. By law. If I'm running an insurance company, and I want to put $1 billion, and a lot of those people are nice people. They want to invest in Africa, but they say, look, if I invest $1 billion, I have to put another $1 billion here as a security, because I'm sorry, but you are sub-grade. You are not investable grade for me. This system is broken. It has to be sorted out. And this rating agency, they all have one office in South Africa, as if South Africa is Africa, 54 countries. They sit in South Africa and pontificate about all of Africa. Again, those guys act as auditors, and guess what? They sell consultancy for African countries about how to improve their grade. Excuse me? This is a clear conflict of interest. You cannot grade people and you go and say, I offer you consultancy how to improve your grade. Excuse me? People go to prison for that. Anyway, so that is something about the rating agency. It has to be sorted out. Then we come to this multinational. I'm amazed about the lack of governance in the World Bank and the IMF. And, I told Ajay and Kristalina the other day, we were all in Paris for a meeting. I said, you guys, if you're running or your banks are listed in any decent stock exchange, you will have been delisted because your governance sucks. Can you have a listed company? Can you have any bank in the world without senior independent directors? Where are the independent directors in the World Bank? None. It's the shareholders major shareholders hug it. Where is the independent directors? Where is the voice of the other countries? Fine, major shareholders keep 60%, 70% of the shares. Fine, but let some fresh air in the room. Get some independent directors in the room. Otherwise, your governance sucks. You'll be delisted. Something else gross really happening in this institution. Do you know that this is the only banks in the world where the board sits in the headquarters? They sit in the headquarters with their staff. And I asked Ajay, how you run your business? You are the president of this institution and you have this board and their staff living on top of you, running around, telling the staff what to do, lobbying for their countries, whatever interest. No, don't give loan to this guy. Hey, you must give that. What is this? This is breach of basics of good governance. Do you know how much it costs the World Bank to keep those guys in residence? Every year, it is over $100 million. Do you know that? $100 million to house the board and their staff every year. Excuse me, what is the job of the World Bank? To eradicate poverty? $100 million every year would have educated 1 million kids in Egypt every year. Why those guys sit there spending $100 million? This is the issue of governance. It has to be addressed. I'll stop here.
Well, thank you very much for bringing the private sector angle, the market angle to the discussions. But the good thing is that it somehow aligns with the suggestions that have all come here. What I get from that, because it helps me to summarize, is that the carbon tax is an agenda that must be taken from here to COP28. And I also agree with it as a banker because you are right. You use tax and subsidies to make sure that you direct certain actions where you want them to go. So I think that is one of the things. And there's also a consensus on reforming the international financial architecture. I don't want to call it architecture. The way the international financial system operates. And that's not just the multilateral. You touched on even the rating agencies. People can also talk about how the stock exchanges operate, if you want to extend it to all those. So I think a comprehensive approach to it is important. And as I agree that the part of the problem is that the negotiations we have is David and Goliath negotiation. Incidentally, the person we should be telling to do more is the Goliath. And the others are the Lilliput, who really should be treated more fairly. But your voice can't rise to that level. But by coming together as Africans, coming together with the Caribbean and Latin America, and having politicians like the Deputy Prime Minister, I think we can start forming a consensus, which started last year in Sharm el-Sheikh. For the first time, loss and damage came on the table. It means some progress is being made. It's a common problem for everybody, and we must make sure we all work together, rich and poor, those who emit and those who don't emit, to make sure we solve it. So thank you. I would now invite, I think, President Ruto to say the last word.
Maybe just three things. I want to agree with the Deputy Prime Minister and Minister of Finance that in this debate, there are no sides. We're on the same side. And we need to begin to drive this from the same side, because the risk that we face when this place burns, it will burn with everybody. The emitters and the non-emitters, the people from the south and the people from the north. That is settled. And because of that, we need to listen very carefully to what Mo Ibrahim is saying. We need to listen very carefully to what Mo Ibrahim is saying. Whether it is carbon tax, and then I believe that that conversation is overdue. If we will not be having a conversation about carbon tax in COP27, and not just that conversation, on the mechanism of the how, and with a proper timeline, then we will not have a meaningful conversation. Number two is the conversation around rating agencies. Credit rating agencies are destroying our economies. We have to be honest with them. Their algorithm is faulty. They are not using empirical science. And I'm saying this as a scientist myself. There is a problem, a big problem with creating credit rating agencies. And in some instances, they are conflicted. And there must be a candid conversation about their data, their findings, and whether they are doing the right thing. And finally, is to say, as Africa, we will be putting together the Nairobi Declaration that is going to be candid, bold, and practical for us to carry that conversation into the UN General Assembly and into COP28.
we are all on the same side. If we burn, everyone burns. His Excellency William Ruto, President of the Republic of Kenya, thank you so much for that conversation, wonderfully hosted by Professor Benedict Orama. Thanks everyone for a great discussion, and to Mo Ibrahim, if you break it, you own it, and reminding us too that there actually is a silver bullet, carbon tax, which His Excellency President Ruto said really has to be on the agenda at COP, regardless of whether it's a David and Goliath negotiation. Today, government leaders have been gathering here to discuss a vision for a greener future. A private sector declaration was signed under the leadership of Equity Group and Dr. James Mwangi, together with international collaborators such as the Commonwealth Enterprise and Investment Council, the East African Business Council, and the Africa Business Leaders Coalition of the UN Global Compact, among others. This declaration in support of government is a commitment to combating climate change by the private sector, which acknowledges the importance of coordination between the public and private sectors to achieve the shared goal of climate action for resilience and green growth. Alongside the Nairobi Declaration, this private sector statement will be heard during the upcoming United Nations General Assembly, the World Bank, IMF, Marrakesh meetings, and at COP28 as the private sector voice of Africa, offering its own commitment to responsible solutions related to climate change. I'd like now to introduce Dr. James Mwangi, Group MD and CEO of Equity Group Holdings, for more to discuss on the global finance architecture and the private sector's point of view. Please, everyone, a very warm applause and welcome to Dr. James Mwangi.
Hey, bana ba Kenya namugeze ndi mulembe gundi waya mumbe kama rumwezera ko bule ko kubanenda kama dunda ko buru mu Kenya waya mumbe kama rumwezera ko bule ko kubanenda kama dunda.
Thank you very much for a great day. I commend all of you for your patience. I assure you, Your Excellency, President Ruto, that we have heard you, and we want now to give the multilateral development banks an opportunity to respond. We want to give the global financial experts an opportunity. They have been in the room. They have heard what has been said, and hopefully they can give us their way forward to the issues that has been raised by the African leaders and the private sector. Without much ado, I want to invite Dr. Akiumi Adeshina. If Adeshina, you are present. Quickly, Honorable Silusua, Minister of State for Development, Francophonia and International Partnerships. Honorable Babel Kolfa, Parliamentary State Secretary, German Federal Ministry of Economic Cooperation and Development. Alexia Tutor, Assistant Secretary of International Trade and Development, U.S. Secretary, U.S. Treasury. Body Deputy Managing Director, International Monetary Fund. And last but not least, Axel Van, Senior Managing Director, World Bank. Thank you very much for leader being patient this afternoon. It was really great listening to the African leaders on the issues of finance. It's apparent that the big elephant in the room is finance. And it appears that the ball has been pushed to the court of the multilateral development banks and international financial institutions. I seem here to have truly the shareholders, if I may say, of those institutions, the policy decision makers. And we want to give them a chance, maybe to respond to the issues the African leaders are raising, to respond to the issues that the private sector, Mo Ibrahim, has articulated, the issues of the private sector. And broadly, if I may summarize so that we have a common understanding of the issues that has been raised, there is the issue of accessibility of finance and speed at which disbursements are made. There is a big issue of affordability, at what cost. His Excellency President Ruto said Africa pays at least 5 times. And the rationale there has been questioned because it's not an African risk. It's a global climate risk that we are talking about. And it has been said, if the world bans, we all ban on it. So it's not a country risk that we are financing. It's a climate risk. So when it comes to that issue, and there is also the question of how much is being availed. And those 3 issues seems to be really at the center of concern of the African leaders. And so we could be able to address ourselves to those issues. But there is also a question of our institutions failing to connect the dots in the way they respond, and particularly to the issue of risk. This issue, and eventually it boils down to the question of equity, fairness, justice, and equality in the world. And so it is in that light that we will be responding to the issues that we have. So without much ado, I've been told the IMF Deputy Managing Director may be catching a flight, so I will ask fellow panelists, maybe if we could give him a chance. And the question maybe to Bo Lee is, how can you talk about IMF's role in climate financing? In particular, I know that the FAD has introduced a new tool called the Resilience and Sustainability Trust. We would appreciate hearing an update on that instrument. And finally, what are some of the keys you see to unlocking additional financing for climate adaptation, especially here in Africa?
Thank you. Thank you for giving me the floor first, because I have to go to the airport after this. Good afternoon. It's an honor to join this distinguished panel. I want to speak very briefly on climate finance and the challenges as we see it and how we can help. Climate finance challenges are most acute in Africa, where adaptation needs are much higher, but climate finance flows are too low. Our number shows that about 20% of all flows reach the continent of Africa, but most is geared towards mitigation. But we know adaptation needs are very high. Let me briefly touch on 4 priorities that we think are important to scale up climate finance, including adaptation finance. The first priority, we think, is to increase domestic resource mobilization. That means both public finance and also private finance domestically. International communities can work together to help African countries to build capacity, to broaden tax base, to increase public financing flow. At the same time, international community can also support African countries to build domestic capital markets, to encourage higher private savings, and also to support financial sector development. The second priority, we think, is to maximize international support. Grants and concessional financing are very important, and so is equity financing. There is already too much debt in Africa, and we need more grants, concessional financing, and equity. The IMF's new Resilience and Sustainability Trust is providing long-term concessional financing and helping countries with limited room in their budget to invest in long-term resilience, including climate. So far, programs have been approved for 10 countries, half of which are in sub-Saharan Africa. The third priority, we think, given the strained public resources, we need to find ways to crowd in private capital. We see a three-pillar approach to crowd in private capital in scale. The first pillar is to create a policy and regulatory environment that are conducive to private finance. The second priority, we think, is technical assistance and capacity building, such as green public financial management, climate public investment management, and project preparation. IMF and MDB partners, we do a lot of technical assistance to support African countries to improve their capacity in these areas. The third pillar refers to innovative financing solutions and financing arrangement that can promote public-private partnership. The keywords here are de-risking and blending. Public sector, including international partners, need to take more calculated risks if we want to crowd in private capital. I stop here. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that great contribution. Let's turn to Honorable Crisora. Crisora, France has commendably played a global leadership role in the conversation on both climate finance and reform of the global financial architecture. A key issue that has emerged in this conversation is the role of the G7 and the G8 in both mitigation and adaptation finance, especially with regard to the realization of pending pledges and commitments. And what is in the progress of on France-led initiatives like the new Global Financing Pact? What do you see as challenges in delivering the new Global Financing Pact and architecture?
Thank you, James, and Excellencies, dear friends. First of all, I'd like to tell you that it's an honor for me also to speak today on behalf of President Macron, 2 months after this important rendezvous in Paris. That was the Paris Summit for a new global financial pact, as you said. And so I'd like to thank Kenya and particularly President Ruto for this historic summit. So, as you said, we listen the African friends and African voices we listened today, but it's for many years that France and the European Union, we listen the voices, the priorities, but also the solutions. So I think you asked me about G7. I'd like to speak about my country. And in European Union, it's the same, but I would like to speak about France, because I think we believe in leading by example. And we believe on SDR reallocation, and what we did, you know, with 40% of French SDRs reallocated towards vulnerable countries. We deliver on climate finance with 6 billion euros per year for our partners, 23, I see my colleague from Germany, 23 billions European Union, that is, we take our responsibilities. We deliver on debt treatment in the Paris Club and common framework. This is important because we speak about G7, but it's the time to say what we do, each of us. And now, as I said, we make our part, but we see also the global injustice, James. And it is true, as you said, that you have to build now a more inclusive and just international financial system who can fit the challenges of the new century. So you spoke to me about the Paris Summit. It was the beginning, and now we continue here in Nairobi, and all together we hope to arrive to COP28 with some results. In Paris, we achieved some important results, the first results. The first was to put together all of them, G7, countries from G7, from G20, the international financial institution, the UN, the small islands, because only together we can build something new. The second is that we have absolutely to restore the trust. If there's no trust, we cannot go forward. And that's why I told you for the first time, we achieve the targets, 100 billion for SDRs and climate finance, and the debt of Zambia, that was very important. So, last, I'd like to say that we propose also a common roadmap, and this roadmap that we call Paris Pact for People and Planet, it is simple. At the end of the story, no country has to choose, no government has to choose between fighting poverty or fighting for the planet. So it is very important. The second thing that we believe, all of us, because there are 30 countries who signed and we believe this roadmap that we push, it is that each country must be able to define their own strategy. And we have to just to support them. And of course, as you said, also the colleague, they said more money, and not only public money, because we put the public money. How the private sector will come, how we can create this shock. So just to finish, I'd like to say that we see two major issues for this climate summit in Nairobi. The first, that we have to advance the discussion on international taxation. This is very important. The second one, yes, everybody has to participate if we want to save our planet. So tax on fossil fuels, on shipping emission, financial transaction could unlock massive resources. And this is very, very important. And of course, we spoke about the debt. The debt, yes, we cannot cancel the debt. There's not a magic, but it is not is not acceptable that African countries spend more on debt services than on climate action. So we have to strengthen the things that we have, like the common framework. And this is something that France and many of us, and of course I think the European Union, we believe. And I'd like to say that President Ruto said that global north versus global south narrative is not possible. I would like to say that I disagree. I totally agree with President Ruto, and I don't like this division. There's not global north and global south. There are global leaders and global laggards, and there are both in the north and in the south. So Kenya is definitely a leader. I think France and EU, we are a leader. So thanks, thanks James,
Thank you very much. It's really, we have been brought to a common framework of decision making, irrespective of whether south or north. Thank you very much. Let's come to you, Honorable Baba Kolfa. Germany has been a significant player in the global conversation on climate, finance, and the reform of global financial architecture. What elements do you regard as the most pertinent when it comes to leveraging more climate finance? And what are the biggest challenges in realizing them? Which steps is Germany taking to enhance climate finance?
Well, thank you. There's so many questions. I was just wondering if there's a fifth one coming. So, but thanks, James, for the questions. And thanks for having me at that conversation here, because I really want to underline what also Chris Fuller was saying. I really like the spirit of this summit, which is a spirit looking for solutions for global challenges and global big problems. And I really want to thank also the Kenyan government for inviting us and for having us and for pushing us forward. That is very important. I think it's crystal clear. Facts are telling us, researchers are telling us, we have to act now. That was the sentence I heard most in that conference. We had all the facts on the table, but we have to act now. So there are, in our opinion in Germany, two layers, I would say, where we have to act. The one is nationally, what we can do nationally on mitigation. I think there is no country in the room who has not room for improvement and becoming better in fulfilling the Paris alignment and really reaching all the national targets in reducing carbon dioxide and equivalents. That is the first challenge, and that's a financial challenge also. But secondly, it's of course about international climate financing on mitigation and on adaptation, so both. One point I would love to say is I think we also have to stop promising at conferences there. We have to deliver. That is coming from the discussion to the action. I'm very glad to hear from my colleague from France about the 6 billion France is fulfilling this year. I'm very happy that we have figures for 22 now that we fulfilled in 22 in Germany, the 6 billions. We will struggle and we will continue that. Together with private sector engagement, we are about $9.5 billion in that case. So I think that is a good step in the direction of the 100 billion. That is something for proving that we are delivering. So climate finance, I think there are two kind of countries who should invest, and that's of course traditional donors. They have the obligation to do more to fulfill what they promise. I would love also to invite those who are new emittents, who are new large emitters, also to come and contribute their share. I would invite that to do so before COP already on the Green Climate Funding Summit in Bonn in October this year. So we are pledging Germany 2 million there, and I use the opportunity to invite everybody who feels the pressure to come up also with their ideas on financing. So that's the financing part. That's the financing part. But we were talking also, and I heard very well what leaders here in the panel before were saying. It's about international financing architecture as well. It's about the World Bank reform. It's about how to finance global public goods aligned with the traditional necessities, I would say, in financing development needs and financing those who are really suffering and are the poorest. And it has to be done both. And we have to have reforms which are at the end of the day opening this space and opening this money, and is then at the end of the day also coming up with a better access. We were talking about ratings before, but with a better access to this money also for countries who want to invest in climate change and who are not don't have the possibility now. And the third point I also want to make is, was mentioned by my colleague from France, is about debts. We really, really cannot ignore what's going on in various countries. Also, the leaders here were talking about 9 African countries running into deep troubles already. So it is necessary that we timely come up with decisions by the common framework. I know how challenging that is, but there has to be a decision about that to support those countries. It's about debt relief on the one hand, and on the other hand, it's also about swaps. I think we should talk about debt to climate swaps and those topics also. My country is, or was announcing here in that conference, a swap which we arranged with Kenya and Kenyan government, and it's a debt to climate swap, investing in rural areas and investing in local farmers, which I think is also something quite necessary. So in a nutshell, 3 things. We have to fulfill the financial commitments, all of us, and also new donors. We have to fulfill our national commitments on mitigation, and we have to really come up with a reform of the World Bank and the development banks to open up space and financial spaces for the member countries on this planet, and we have to solve the debt crisis. My government is there for fighting for those 3 goals. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, really. I was expecting a very challenging conversation this afternoon, but I'm very impressed by the level of alignment. Let's turn to Alexia. The US has played a very important role in global leadership in various areas since the end of the Second World War, particularly in the development of current global financial architecture. Just like then, we are faced with another issue of significant global importance, the climate crisis. Africa, unfortunately, is living the effects of this climate crisis that it didn't play a significant part in creating. How do you see the role of America global leadership moving forward with regard to climate finance in Africa? Of particular interest to Africans, the United States made a pledge of $21 billion in special drawing right. What is the progress on that commitment, and how can the United States play a leadership role in honoring of commitments within the G7 and the G20?
Thank you so much. James, I'll try to answer all those questions. If I may, I'd like to correct just one thing you said when you opened up the panel. You said now the shareholders are, here on the panel. I think we've been hearing, as President Ruto reminded us, from shareholders all day. So this is just a few extra ones, James, on the table. So it's really a privilege to be here at the Africa Climate Summit. I think this summit has proved to be truly a pivotal moment in a year of ambition for trying to partner with emerging and developing countries, including here in Africa, to really rise to the challenge of the moment. And as President Ruto also said, this really is indeed a global pre-COP. That's how significant I think these past few days have been. President Ruto talks often about the importance of clear communication, of stating what is needed clearly, of listening attentively so that we can then act collectively. And I have heard very clear messages here in Nairobi. And what is heartening is I actually see a lot of alignment on some of those messages, James. What's at stake, I think, is clear. In our uncertain world, the one thing that is certain is that shocks there will be. And what's disturbing is that these shocks are coming fast, they're furious, and they're highly frequent. And they hit first and hardest the most vulnerable countries and communities, including the countries that have the least means and fiscal space to respond to them, to rebuild, not to mention to actually prepare for them. I think the second thing that is very clear is that climate change demands new approaches. And the Nairobi Declaration, I haven't seen the final version, but the drafts that I've been seeing, the latest draft I saw, there is so much in there that the United States can fully subscribe to. And I think it really does lay out a path of what is needed with respect to these new approaches. So let me now quickly share 4.5 points to answer, James, your more specific question about US leadership. And I should say, US leadership will only work if it's in partnership. So first point is indeed evolving the MDBs. Secretary Yellen, about a year ago now, launched a call for the development banks to evolve to provide 21st century solutions to 21st century challenges. And she laid out 4 areas where she thought those reforms were very important. And there's now a broad coalition supporting this work. The first one was around the mission and the vision of the development banks. And that's really a simple message, which is that sustained progress on poverty reduction and achieving the sustainable development goals will not be possible if we don't address global challenges, climate change first and foremost. And I think President Ruto said it yesterday, the goals of climate change and development are positively reinforcing. Secretary Yellen often says mutually reinforcing. I think it's the same message. Second area of reform is around incentives. And the Nairobi Declaration talks about incentives for countries to make investments that are climate aligned. And it's true that we're asking countries to make investments that have benefits that often are regional and global. And so it's only fair that in such cases, the global community helps to pay for the cost of these investments. So that's about incentives. Thirdly is around the operational model of the MDBs. And we talked about the importance of agility and speed and responsiveness to the needs of your countries. That's part of the agenda. Part of the agenda is also making sure that climate change is integrated from the very first diagnostics that are done to implementation through country strategies to monitoring, learning, and evaluation, including in the corporate scorecard to hold the institutions to account. There's talk in the Nairobi Declaration about the importance of working with cities, and we've also asked the development banks to be able to do more at the subnational level. Fourthly, and where everyone usually starts, James, is financial capacity, which has been a big topic here. So obviously, to be able to respond to this more complex agenda, the development banks need to have more wherewithal to be able to deliver. And so stretching the balance sheets of the institutions responsibly, focusing on domestic resource mobilization, helping countries build here in Africa deep capital and debt markets, That's all part of the agenda. But also it's about how we shareholders support the institutions. So for example, providing guarantees to be able to unlock more lending headroom in the institutions, or perhaps purchasing hybrid capital, because now the banks are developing frameworks for that. That is also part of the agenda. And leading into the G20 meeting, which of course is this weekend, the United States has made a proposal, President Biden has made a proposal to Congress to be able to support the World Bank Group to boost its concessional finance. There was a lot of discussion in the previous panel about the importance of concessional finance, to boost the concessional finance of the World Bank by $25 billion, and to help some of that additional headroom be on better terms so that country can use that financing to tackle global challenges, as well as providing money to IDA for crisis response. We're asking countries to join us to provide extra concessional financing to the World Bank in the very near term, and we expect strong G20 language around this call, and certainly hope that other countries on this stage and others will also join us in providing the support to the institutions. So very quickly, the second point is around the climate finance architecture. We have a diversity of funds. It's very hard for countries to even know, do I go to the GCF, the GEF, the alphabet soup? We need to help to reduce the fragmentation of these funds and to make the ease of access better for countries by streamlining the procedures, harmonizing the policies for the ease of access to these instruments. Thirdly, private capital mobilization. This point was made several times already. We think it's absolutely critical to make progress on this. We need better data and information. Investors from my country and other advanced countries have a lot of misperceptions about the risk in Africa. Actually, long-term infrastructure debt performs very well in emerging markets. So we need to have the data to be transparent, to give the confidence for investors to come in. We need to have the right policies also in your countries to make sure that we have clear rule of law, predictability around how courts will behave for investors to come in. We need to have a more sophisticated palette of instruments, whether it's guarantees, political risk insurance, to also be able to de-risk for the private sector to come in, and to also use blended finance. And of course, we need to, and the Nigerian colleague yesterday on one of the panels from the Sovereign Wealth Fund talked about the importance of building the next generation of projects that will be bankable. And then finally, I think the MDBs, and I'm looking at Axel here, they have a role in terms of really changing their culture, their incentives to know that their impact will not actually be by only spending their money, because that will always be limited, however generous we all are. It really is about helping to bring in the private sector. My fourth point is around debt. My colleagues on the panel spoke about it. It is clear that progress has been too slow. We're happy that we're seeing progress now on Zambia. We're starting to see progress with Ghana, but it's been too slow. And so it is a top priority for the US government and the US Treasury to help make the process more predictable with a clear time-bound agenda for when countries can get debt relief and debt restructuring, and more predictable. So that's a top priority. And then my half point is around ideas we have, Bo, for the IMF. And my undersecretary will be giving a speech on Thursday with some of the ideas for the IMF, so I will just say, tune in and listen to him on Thursday to save some time. Let me end to say that climate change clearly is probably the most challenging collective action problem the world has ever faced. And so we need to make sure that the collective is representative of all of the world. And I think the Africa Climate Summit really brought the voice of Africa to the table in a way that is as clear and as strong as I've ever heard it. And I hope that we continue this positive direction this weekend with hopefully the G20 agreeing to an African Union chair so that the collective continues to be as representative as possible. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Alexis. Very, I hope France and Germany will support America as regards that agenda in the G7 7 and the G20, so that truly we can hold each other to account. But let's move to the World Bank. My friend, Axel, you have heard the African leaders. They have really been vocal about the need for more and more effective financial support for Africa, including when it comes to climate impacts. How do you see the World Bank ongoing reform process helping to deliver on this agenda? And perhaps specifically commenting on the efforts to ensure resource and capital adequacy of different facilities so that we address the three issues.
Well, thank you very much. At first, I would like to really congratulate Kenya for convening this. Quite frankly, this is a meeting that has been over 30 years in the waiting after Rio. And that is not a good sign, but a good sign that it is happening. And what was, for me, most encouraging is that Africa is articulating a voice. And this is basically when all of you talking about the reform of the World Bank or other MDBs. It's not about the reform of the World Bank, it's the reform of the mindset of everybody. Namely, when you are listening here to voice, then you have to ask the critical question, do we allow that voice into the World Bank or other organizations in a way that should be responding to what is needed? After all, half of our lending is going to Africa, yet African chairs are only representing a very small voice in our board. And so I think also for the membership to reflect is, when we're talking about evolution roadmap, is the evolution of voice. Are we democratizing our organizations and letting also that we listen to the African voice, what is needed, and let them then also reflect this? This is right now not happening. It is overdue. And I think this is very, very important, because I think we can talk about a lot of money and a lot of things what need to happen. But at the end, what I think also President Ruto articulated very clearly is that it is the African strategy that will count. And if we don't listen and follow those large outlines, we are missing something. And we are in for a disappointment. This is also managing the expectation. When we have this, are we listening? And do we actually meet the expectation of Africa that it is genuine listening and genuine follow-up, or if it is the politically correct behavior? That's the first one. The second challenge is that Africa needs for climate change every year $280 billion. Yet only 30 billion, 10% is available. The bank covers about a third of this. Everybody needs to need more. And we heard that from domestic resource mobilization, domestic private capital, foreign capital, multilateral, nobody can do it alone. So that is an important thing, that this is a collective responsibility. It's not the responsibility of one or finger pointing. It is how can you actually try to close that gap. Will not be done overnight, but we need to make an effort, and that effort needs to be done by all. And I think there, in that context, it is important that maybe we are setting some targets for ourselves. Are we doing this? I think where we have been helping is actually in IDA, quite frankly, what I have found, having also managed and chaired this, it's actually an interesting process where there's a lot of discussions, also from the donors, but also from the beneficiary countries, to push the climate change agenda. And in that sense, we have achieved, for example, 50-50 at mitigation and adaptation. But this is largely an outcome of a fairly good discussion among both the beneficiary countries, but also the donor countries. And it has also been successful largely through the generosity of donors. And that actually we need to think about this. That IDA has been successful. We are providing about $65–70 billion over 3 years to Africa. And next time we need to be more ambitious. Politically, there's a change. I have never in my career heard in the G20, nor in the Paris Agreement, a half a year before the negotiations essentially start, that actually all actors are calling for an ambitious IDA. I think from a political point of view, that's positive. I've never seen that. Also, what's interesting is now IDA is more recognized. 10 years ago, in any of the international fora, they would say, what's IDA? Right now it's accepted. So that is a good news, but now we need to see how we can have this, because the big challenge is how we can be even more ambitious so that actually more money can go into climate change. One of the challenges is clearly the mobilization of private sector. And I think here we need all to be self-critical. We have not been hugely successful. Now in IDA, we have a private sector window that helps to de-risk this. We need to do more of this. What I also think is, only IDA is not sufficient. I have often been wondering, when we talk about the MDBs, why can't every MDB create a private sector window, including National Development Bank, AFD, KfW, others, so that actually we get to a critical mass for private sector de-risking. That is necessary. Secondly, we need concessional resources. All the ladies who are sitting are representing countries whose fiscal situation is under stress. So it's not so easy to mobilize all the resources. So my second suggestion is, what IBRD has done since 1965 is transferring some of the net income to IDA. Why can't not every MDB do that? A little bit, but to the extent that, because we need more concessional resources on this. And I think that is one of the things we all need to start thinking about, that on how we can actually mobilize this. I think that is one of the areas. The second area is, of course, then in the non-concession on the IBRD, and there are these famous capital adequacy framework measures. I think we have gone far. We have a whole package again for October, and you will identify more money. The more difficult question is this enough? And when you compare 280 billion only for this continent versus 30 billion, there is going to be a very critical discussion. How do we mobilize that more resources? And that is going to be a very, very tough one, in which we need to see how we can actually include also more to say really the private sector. That means policy reform at home, how you can incentivize more on the investments. It may well be also capitalizing much more on the Africa Free Trade area, that actually there is incentives, that there is more economic benefits to it. And it's on the debt situation where I think we are learning now from each other. There is a global sovereign debt roundtable, which is actually interested. It is not only where the managing director of the IMF is and the president of the World Bank, but it has also the Paris Club, other bilaterals, private sector, and the affected countries at the table. And we have it also at the deputy levels. I think actually that dialogue is actually interesting. It starts basically appreciating more the other views, but also the point I think Alexia has been making, it is simply not acceptable that a country like Zambia needs to wait 2 years. We need to find a way that there is some automaticity that countries can do it. For the multilaterals in low-income countries, that may also include, and we did that in Zambia, lending into arrears, because these countries are starting and they cannot afford this. Now I'm seeing we have to stop, so I have to hand this back. I see this is a clear signal. Anyhow, I think what I just want to say, the bank is on the move on this, but we need to move together, and we need to be aggressively on this. But most important takeaway for me from this summit here is voice of Africa matters, and it needs to be systematically included in our discussions for the future. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Axel. I really like how you summed it up, and it has been demonstrated throughout the conversation that we have listened to each other. We seem to have developed a common vocabulary on how to deal with the challenges. There seems to be no resistance on reforms. We agree there will be need for reforms. There is need for working together to solve a common problem. And I leave this evening very hopeful that we could see IMF, US, France, Germany, World Bank, speaking with the same voice and responding appropriately to the African leaders. And I'm sure we'll find pathways to complete, to have not just a common understanding, but maybe work together in solving the issue of climate change. I wish we had more time, but I ask my audience to join me in appreciating this panel for leading the passion, the enthusiasm, and the commitment of their faith. I thank you most sincerely for joining us. Axel ended up by saying there is an opportunity for the private sector. And truly, we can't end this conversation without evaluating the markets and the actors in the market. So allow me to call the final panel for the evening. And as I release my colleagues of this evening, but I invite you to listen to the next upcoming panel. Yeah. Okay, sorry.
We are ready? I think we're ready. We are ready.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
It was really fun. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, esteemed guests, Your Excellencies, Your Honorable Ministers, thank you very much. We are going to jump right in to renewable energy and transitions. And I would like to invite to sit on the panel Nigerian Honorable Minister of Environment, Dr. Ishaq Salako. I would like to have join us Senegalese Honorable Minister Ali Ouine Ndoye, Minister de l'Environnement, du Développement Durable et de la Transition Écologique. Mary, can we please get headphones for the Honorable Minister? Okay, thank you. Honorable Minister, you'll find translation. Can I please ask His Excellency Brazilian Special Envoy for Climate Change, Luiz Figueiredo, to come join us on the stage? Can I please ask Julia Suda, CEO of Long Duration Energy Storage Council and Chair, Global Renewables Alliance. Can I ask Jeanette Gitobo, Director at the Global Wind Energy Council? And can I please ask Vanessa Nakate, UNICEF Goodwill Ambassador? Minister Ishaq, sorry, do you have a microphone there? Would you mind talking us through Nigeria's energy transition plan?
Thank you very much. Nigeria has an energy transition plan that is anchored on addressing two major crises. The crisis of energy poverty, where we have close to 40 million Nigerians not having access to electricity, and also to address the crisis of climate change. Nigeria experiences extreme weather conditions as a result of climate change, from desertification and droughts, erosion, floods, especially in the coastal regions. And our energy transition plan is anchored on addressing those two major crises. The overall objective is to ensure that by 2030 we achieve SDG 7, and by 2060 we achieve zero emission. In order to do that, we're taking climate actions that is pro-development and doing development that enhances climate action. Nigeria's energy transition plan is aiming at taking 100 million people out of poverty through livelihood programs, through food security programs, and through creation of wealth. We also have a plan to stop flaring of gas so that we can have a more sustainable use of natural gas to drive our vehicles, to use in industries, such that the emission emanating from that is halted or reduced considerably. There's also a plan to ensure that our households use more environmentally friendly sources of energy for cooking, transiting from using of firewood and coal to the use of natural gas, so that our emissions and our plan to achieve zero emission by 2060 is met. So in broad terms, those summarizes the energy transition plan of Nigeria.
Brilliant, Minister. And can you just talk to how is it going to be a just transition?
Well, basically, the plan leaves nobody behind. We're going to ensure energy equity and ensure that every element, every segment of Nigeria, every socio-economic class of Nigeria is integrated and well involved in the plan. Earlier on, I spoke about the plan to create move 100 million people out of poverty. And that is going to be done involving the communities and community gatekeepers, such that even the lowest person is involved and energized and empowered in the energy transition plan. So there will be a lot of equity and everybody will be involved.
Thank you very much, Honourable Minister.
You're welcome.
I'll now turn to the Senegalese Honourable Minister of Environment, Minister Alion Ndoye. Minister, first of all, congratulations on Senegal agreeing on a $2.5 billion agreement with the International Partners Group for a just energy transition partnership. For the benefit of us all here, would you be able to unpack that a little bit? Can you speak to what made Senegal a compelling and credible partner in securing this funding and these funding commitments?
Merci beaucoup. Alors, vous avez fait allusion à la signature par le Sénégal au mois de juin de la JETP avec donc le groupe des partenaires internationaux, la France, le Canada, etc., et qui porte sur effectivement 2,5 milliards d'euros, avec, si je résume, un engagement du Sénégal qui aujourd'hui est en mix énergétique à 31%, de le porter à 40%. Mais également avec un engagement d'accompagnement des partenaires sur toute la partie recherche scientifique, mais également l'acceptation du fait que le Sénégal compte utiliser son gaz comme une énergie de transition, donc avec une stratégie du gaz to power. Donc en résumé de cette JETP, c'est principalement ça les engagements d'ici 2030 de porter notre mix énergétique à 40% d'énergie renouvelable. Et comme je l'ai dit, le Sénégal aujourd'hui, grâce à l'énergie éolienne, grâce au solaire, etc., a un mix énergétique qui est composé de 31% d'énergie renouvelable.
Thank you very much, Honourable Minister. Can you speak to a little to what role gas will play in Senegal's energy transition?
Je n'ai pas eu la traduction. Vous voulez des explications sur notre stratégie gaz pour l'énergie? Oui, parce que nous considérons qu'aujourd'hui nous sommes, du point de vue énergétique, dans la consommation d'énergie fossile, et que le fait de passer par le gaz nous donne une trajectoire beaucoup plus sobre en carbone. Et cela, je pense, est de plus en plus accepté. Parce que vous conviendrez quand même que des pays comme le Sénégal, qui vient de découvrir d'importantes réserves de gaz et de pétrole, et qui aujourd'hui a des milliers de villages qui ne sont pas électrifiés. Tout à l'heure, nos collègues ici ont rappelé qu'aujourd'hui, en termes de justice, 600 millions d'Africains n'ont pas accès à l'énergie, et qui dit énergie du développement.
100 millions of Africans do not have energy, and when you talk about energy, you talk about development. Therefore, that's why we are trying to talk about just an equitable trajectory in terms of carbon reductions. So, gas is our commitment that we are making to try to reduce by 2030, 40%, and this is a more realistic trajectory.
We now turn to Brazilian Special Envoy for Climate Change, Luis Figueiredo. Ambassador, Brazil has already got a power production that matches a substantial portion of the continent. And a substantial portion of that production of energy comes from hydropower, 64%, I believe. But I want to turn to Brazil's nuclear capacity. Ambassador, what conditions make it safe to deploy nuclear, and how will that help us reach net zero in the rest of the world, and in Africa in particular?
Thank you very much for your question. As you may know, Brazil energy mix is one of the cleanest energy mixes in major economies. In terms of electricity, 85% of our electricity comes from renewable sources, while in average in the world, 18% of the electricity mix comes from renewable sources. Again, we have 85%, the world as an average has 18%. So this has to do with a mix of the fact that nature helped us in terms of geography, of course, but it has to do also with a lot of work that was put into that and a lot of investments. So when we talk about energy transition, I think we are very comfortable in terms of being ready to do that and to move further in other sources of clean energy. It is projected that by 2030 we will have around 25% of our electricity mix coming from wind and solar power. So we are investing very hard. 99% of our population already has access to electricity, and we are investing in getting 100%, working on the 1% that is left, mainly in the Amazon area. We have a new program that will take care of that. So we are doing our homework. On the question specifically of nuclear, nuclear is something that has to be considered when you look for sources of energy that do not emit. And we have a long lasting nuclear program which has proven to be extremely safe throughout the years, with two plants that are currently producing energy, and we are building a third plant. So yes, it is part of our effort, but I would say it is not the major aspect of our energy mix.
Thank you, Ambassador. And apologies to the panelists. I'm going to keep my questions to one question each now. I'm going to now turn to UN Habitat Executive Director Maimouna Sharif. Thank you very much for joining us. Maimouna, the number of people relying solely on traditional cook stoves, earthen and brick cook stoves, has remained largely unchanged for the past 2 decades, in spite of almost 3 decades of interventions to move people to cleaner cooking. Barriers to adoption include the costs of purchasing cook stoves and the costs of using liquid fuels. Are there any new innovative solutions and ideas that UN Habitat has in considering it on how to solve the seemingly intractable problem?
Thank you so much for that question. I think this is very important, and I would like to bring you one step before I answer that question. I think I would like to share that when we talk about climate change, we need to link it to the cities and urbanization. If we don't make our cities right, then we will have a lot of problem at the end of the thing to clean up what we call calamities or climate change. And one of the areas that when you talk about cooking, globally 1.3 billion people rely on biomass. And this affects the health and also the pollution, deforestation, and the same 4 million people, especially the children and the women, the death yearly due to this problem. And what we like to see is that how can we make the new innovation, and for example the gas stove and LPG is to be affordable, the alternative means to be affordable, accessible, and adequate for the people to change, to move from cooking using the firewood into the more cleaner method. And one of the areas is that what we would like to see is that the investment, there is still there is still investment gap from to change the habits or the need from the firewood or the biomass into the more cleaner energy, as what been stated by the President Kenya Ruto this morning, and all those member states and the head of the government was mentioned that. And one of the areas that we in UN Habitat, we look at climate change in two things. One is nature, one is the built environment. And one of the areas that we in the UN Habitat, we already have the collaboration with the Kenya startup during the urban UN Habitat Assembly 2, we have demonstrate the cheap and affordable stove that can be purchased by the people and at the affordable price for the number or limited number of cookings. I think this is also important, and at the same time we also looking into the areas of the built environment. When you talk about cooking, and this is also linked, very clearly linked to the housing. And the way that we design our home, the way that we design our communities, I think this is also lead to the usage of the biomass. And one of the areas that we would like to see is that recently we worked together with the Swiss government in having the good housing, which is green, and also using the solar and a method of cooking that is affordable and is already implemented in Kigali. And we have this model of the housing in Nairobi complex, and please come forward and see yourself the house that in the complex, and also all the areas. Two areas, one thing is that the normative part and also the program on the ground. Thank you so much for that question. Thank you.
Global Wind Energy Council. And Vanessa, the UNICEF Goodwill Ambassador, I'm going to ask you the questions I'm going to ask you now. And please, if you can give us your responses succinctly. Julia, how close are we to making intermittent renewables cost-competitive sources of baseload and peak demand energy through long-duration energy storage? Jeanette, what job creation possibilities are there in wind? And Vanessa, rounding out with you, when we speak about a just transition, what does that mean to you? So starting with Julia.
Thank you very much for the opportunity to be here. Thank you very much for the opportunity to be here and for the question. It's been remarkable to be listening to all the presidents and ministers focus on partnerships. And to answer your question, partnerships are critical to the clean energy transition. Long duration energy storage with solar and wind can bring costs down and are doing this around the world. As we align more with wind and solar targets, as we scale up in our industries, our economies, and our infrastructure, we see the prices drop faster than they did in 10 years. They'll drop in 5 years. And this is happening because the diversity of long duration energy storage, whether it's 10 hours, 24 hours, 100 hours, you get the flexibility you need in a remote system, a mining industry, an urban center, or a microgrid. And so these 4 different types, whether it's hydrogen, batteries, whether it's thermal energy stored heat, or mechanical, pumped hydro, all of these options are in the marketplace, and we need to scale them today so that we can bring costs down and deploy. What we need to see improve is market access and criteria for more transparency and accountability so that we really can move to de-risk the energy transition. And lastly, as we move forward to bring in long duration in partnership with solar and wind, it's really important that we have security, reliability, and affordability in the matrix. and how we can make this work, and we look forward to working with all of you to ensure the scaling up of renewable energy to lower costs and bring affordable, accessible energy to all.
Thank you, Julia. Jeanette.
Thanks for that question, and good evening, everyone. When it comes to wind, especially...
1 2 1 2 1 2. Na mtazamaji, hili ni kongamano la mabadiliko ya tabia nchi, na leo imekuwa ni siku ya pili. Kama unavyoona kwenye runinga yako, hii ni baadhi ya mijadala ambayo imekuwa ikiendelea kwa siku nzima tangu asubuhi, ambapo kuanzia hapo asubuhi, mtazamaji, tumeweza kuona marais wa mataifa mbalimbali wa bara Afrika ambao waliweza kuwa katika mijadala hii ambayo imekuwa ikiendelea tangu asubuhi, wakiweza kuongea na kujadili masuala kadhaa yanayokumba bara hili la Afrika. Kikubwa ambacho kiliweza kujitokeza katika majadiliano haya ni masuala kuhusiana na ufadhili wa miradi ya mabadiliko ya tabia nchi, huku wakiwahimiza wenzao kuweza kuhakikisha kuwa wanaweza kuwekeza zaidi katika miradi mbalimbali ili kuweza kupunguza athari ya makali ya mabadiliko ya tabia nchi. Basi mtazamaji, kwa sasa tunaenda kukuletea habari zetu za darubini ya Channel 1. Kumbuka vile vile hapo kesho tutakuwa tunakuletea kongamano hili na mijadala mingine mbalimbali ambayo itakuwa ikiendelea, lakini kwa sasa tuweze kupata vidokezo vya darubini.
Jambo is the greetings. Maybe, and when somebody else tells you Jambo, you reply Jambo. It's simple. Jambo. Good. I will take you one more step. When you want to say, how are you? You say Mambo. Simple. And then the reply is Poa. Okay, let's go. Mambo? Good. There you go. So I'm sure you'll find your way around with that. Africa is a very young continent. Our median age is 19. Africa's youthfulness is precisely the attribute that has inspired African leaders to imagine a future where Africa finally steps into the stage as an economic and industrial power, an effective and positive actor on a global arena. I am very proud because of this realization, and it has motivated Africa's leaders to create meaningful opportunities for young people to participate in, contribute to, and take charge of consequential endeavors in many sectors. This bold policy is already transforming the strategic landscape of climate action and is swiftly propelling our continent to a focal point of global sustainability agenda. On Sunday, at the Youth Summit, we saw for ourselves the immensity of the potential that we can unleash simply by facilitating positive youth action at all levels in every sector. Potential and opportunity are both futuristic propositions. The African Climate Summit has been designed to enable us locate our intense engagements and the most energized discourse in order to facilitate imaginative, problem-solving, and innovative interventions that are bold enough to meet the critical challenges of the present and future times. This is why potential, opportunity, the future, and youth are recurrent themes that underlie our interactions in this summit. We have convened here to consult, deliberate, and collaborate in imagining and designing the future of climate action globally and its implications for African aspirations to achieve shared prosperity within one generation. This summit is dedicated exclusively to the transformation of potential into opportunity. the conversion of ideas into actions, and the turning of plans into results. It is about creating a firm consensus, designing effective strategies, securing commitments, and forging transformative partnerships that will drive climate action in the direction and at the rate required to pull our continent and planet back from the brink of a climate disaster. The urgency of this moment is informed by the knowledge that climate change is the greatest challenge, not only to the well-being of humanity, but to every existence of life on Earth, and that only urgent and coordinated action on a global scale can stop the impending catastrophe by lowering greenhouse gas emissions and reducing their concentration in the atmosphere. This is an immense and formidable challenge, even at the best of times. However, the time we are in, and in which we must implement this urgent and daunting undertaking, is a complicated and difficult time for nations throughout the world. Regional conflict with geopolitical ramifications have compounded the disruptive impacts of the COVID-19 pandemic to throw global supply chains into disarray, slowing down economies, raising the cost of living, suppressing economic growth, and straining food systems to a breaking point. The complex interplay of these circumstances also combine with other localized vulnerabilities to drive adversity in many communities, placing intense pressure on governments to reconfigure resources, allocation, and other strategic interventions. In short, it would be understandable if African leaders prioritized other commitments and relegated climate action to an afterthought. This is why I proudly celebrate the courage and imagination with which the people of Africa and their leaders have converged with extraordinary focus and commitment on the climate agenda, not as an additional or peripheral concern for public policy, but as the foremost priority and the defining intervention in our collective journey to shared prosperity. As a result, patient consultation, thorough debate, determined collaboration, and bold confrontation of facts in issue, it has become clear to us at the Africa Union, under the aegis of the Committee of African Heads of State on Climate Change, that tackling climate change also produces the solutions for the complex interconnected crisis that we face today. This is what this summit is designed to underscore. Collectively, we hold the power to transform the current continental and global trajectory. More critically, we all have an urgent responsibility to do so with a sense of collective purpose that matches the sense of urgency demonstrated by Africa's young people at the Youth Summit earlier this week. Although we are gathered here to explore the means by which we can unite in action for the greater good, we have taken full account of the fact that we are not all at the same place in terms of our experiences with climate change. All countries struggle to achieve socio-economic progress under various constraints. Due to a range of complex and interconnected historical, political, and economic factors, African countries struggle with unique, inordinate, and incredibly complex structural drawbacks in the quest to provide opportunities for their peoples to achieve prosperity. Nevertheless, we have all, in our different ways, succeeded in making
progress over the years amid these extraordinary difficulties. The tragedy of climate change is that it is relentlessly eating away at this progress. And going by evidence based on scientific projections, its appetite to consume our GDP will grow in years to come. We are already losing between 5 and 15% of our GDP growth every year to the adverse impacts of climate change. At the same time, the cost of adaptation continues to rise along with the cost of living, while the cost of development capital for African countries remains prohibitive as millions of our youth remain unemployed. Only rapid and inclusive transformation powered by robust industrialization can place us firmly on a path towards sustainable resolution of these challenges. A sound understanding of the nature and causes of climate change, coupled with our experience of its devastating effects, has provided us with a robust early warning system that the classical economic development progression precedent is not available for us as a pathway to this transformation. As Africans, we are strongly persuaded that not only is it urgent for us to execute an audacious leapfrogging of the traditional developmental pathway to industrialization, but urgent ecological imperatives also dictate that we must go green first before industrializing, and not vice versa, like the advanced industrial economies had the luxury to do. I emphasize this point to underscore the principle underlying Africa's position on climate action agenda and the foundation of our strategic, institutional, and policy direction. We have an unprecedented opportunity to abandon the well-trodden yet unsustainable path of the past and forge a new route that aligns economic inclusion and shared prosperity with climate commitment imperatives. Africa's low rate of greenhouse gas emissions must not relegate us to the margins and footnotes of the global climate agenda. Africa must step forward as the cornerstone around which effective climate solutions are built. Yesterday, I encouraged participants in this summit to disregard the grievance standpoint and instead consider climate action imperative through an opportunity lens. As soon as we do that, a nexus of feasible sequences begins to emerge in an unbroken continuum from potential to opportunity, and through investments and technological innovation into green manufacturing and industrialization, including shared prosperity. Our untapped renewable energy potential, together with the world's youngest population of skilled, motivated, and knowledgeable industrial men and women, along with Africa's abundant endowment of natural assets from carbon sinks to arable land and mineral wealth, confer on us the indispensable fundamentals to swiftly become a cost-competitive industrial hub with ample capacity to decarbonize global manufacturing and green the economies of our continent, our neighborhoods, and the globe. It is good for us to be open about the need to confront a couple of basic truths. First, it is demonstrably clear that none of the world's industrialized nations will be able to achieve their net zero goals within the time indicated by scientists to avert further warming. Secondly, unlocking Africa's potential to undertake economic transformation along a green trajectory is the most feasible, just, and efficient way to attain a net zero world by 2050. With those two combined, Africa's capacity to limit its own emissions is the clearest pathway to enable the world to achieve its climate action targets. Africa's opportunity is a global opportunity and a chance for humanity to redeem its intergenerational legacy. Scientific experts have consistently demonstrated from analyzing available evidence and making projections that these can be achieved while generating jobs in their millions, creating enormous investment opportunities, and catalyzing unprecedented economic growth. Under a proper green growth paradigm, climate action also serves as a robust engine for poverty reduction, employment and wealth creation, and economic transformation. By definition, effective climate action must entail technological leapfrogging to disrupt and invent the industrial development pathway and go green first. It must also involve effective decarbonization of global production and supply chains and deliberate efforts to remove carbon from the atmosphere at scale. Understood this way, green growth aligns perfectly with opportunity-oriented perspectives of climate change, which presents Africa with its most important means of achieving stability, prosperity, and development beyond middle-income industrial status. To achieve green growth, we in Africa have committed to move with speed and under various effective frameworks to develop the necessary instruments, institutions, policies, and strategies through which we shall design and implement incentives that will accelerate the delivery of priority actions. We shall